The first night, the house creaked and groaned as if it was alive. I dismissed it as old wood settling, but something felt off. The air inside was heavy, like it had weight, and no matter how much I cleaned, there was always the faintest smell of decay beneath the surface. The first tragedy struck within a week. My dog, Duke, a big German shepherd who had never shown fear in his life, refused to go upstairs. He would whimper and scratch at the floor whenever I tried to coax him. Then, one morning, I found him lying stiff and cold in the middle of the kitchen. No wounds, no signs of distress, just gone. The vet couldn't explain it. I started sleeping with the lights on after that. Then came the voices. At first, they were whispers, almost like the wind was sneaking through cracks in the walls, carrying secrets from long ago. But they grew louder, distinct. I would wake up in the dead of night to hear a woman sobbing, a deep, guttural laugh echoing through the hallways. I searched the house from top to bottom, but there was no one. One night, as I stood in the upstairs hallway, the air turned ice cold. My breath came out in visible puffs. That's when I saw it. A shadow, darker than the night, slithering from the corner of my bedroom, stretching towards me. I ran, tripping down the stairs, nearly breaking my neck in the process. I locked myself in the bathroom until the sun came up. The house wanted me gone. And I was ready to leave. But fate had other plans. The second tragedy struck when I tried to leave. My car, which had been working fine, refused to start. I called a tow truck, but the driver never showed. The phone lines went dead, and my cell wouldn't get a signal. It was like the house had cut me off from the rest of the world. That night, I heard knocking at my bedroom door. Slow. Rhythmic. I held my breath, gripping the covers, too terrified to move. The knocking turned to scratching, nails dragging across the wood. Then, the door burst open. Nothing was there. I packed a bag the next morning and decided I would walk to town if I had to. But when I stepped outside, the landscape had changed. The dirt road leading to the main highway was gone, replaced by a dense forest that hadn't been there before. The house had swallowed me whole. The third tragedy came with the realization that I wasn't alone. Not anymore. I started seeing them, figures in the corners of my eyes, standing just out of reach. A little girl with hollow eyes at the foot of my bed. A tall man with no face standing in the doorway. And the woman. The one who sobbed in the night. I saw her reflection in the bathroom mirror, standing right behind me, her mouth stretched open in a silent scream. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. Then, the final tragedy. I woke up one morning and found myself outside. The house loomed behind me, its windows like empty eyes, watching. My clothes were soaked in blood. My hands trembled as I raised them. I wasn't hurt. But someone had been. That's when I saw the grave. A fresh mound of earth, the dirt still loose. And beside it, a headstone, carved with a name I recognized. My own. The house hadn't just trapped me. It had claimed me. And then, a name surfaced in my mind, one that hadn't been spoken in centuries. Ephraim Keller. I didn't know how I knew it, but it belonged to the man who had lived here before, long before the farmhouse had been abandoned. A forgotten diary I found in the cellar revealed his story, a farmer obsessed with his harvest, one that brought prosperity to the land but at a terrible cost. He had a dog, a monstrous beast, trained to keep intruders away from his fields. One fateful night, the dog attacked a wandering traveler, a historian seeking shelter from the storm. The man barely escaped, but he cursed Ephraim, swearing that the land would one day consume him and any who dared to claim it. I heard the growl before I saw it. The beast was still here. And it was hungry. I didn't run. There was nowhere to go. The growl rumbled through the air, deep and guttural, vibrating in my chest like thunder rolling in from a storm. My body wanted to bolt, to scramble away from the unseen beast lurking in the shadows, but something held me still. The diary was still clutched in my trembling hands, its pages yellowed and brittle, but the words were burned into my mind. Ephraim Keller hadn't just been a farmer, he had been a harvester of something far worse than crops. The land was cursed. And the dog, if that thing could still be called a dog, was its guardian. A gust of wind kicked up the loose dirt by the grave, sending it swirling into the air, and that's when I saw them. More names, half buried beneath the soil. The graves stretched far beyond what my eyes could see, scattered across the field like a hidden cemetery. I stepped back, my boots sinking into something too soft. My breath hitched as I looked down. A hand? Not skeletal, not rotted, fresh, as if someone had just been buried alive. I stumbled away, heart hammering. The diary had mentioned something about a traveler who had cursed Ephraim. But there was more. A page stuck to the back cover, one I hadn't noticed before. I peeled it apart with shaky fingers and read the final, smudged words. The harvest must be fed. A sharp rustling came from the trees, and the growling deepened closer now. Then I saw it. Glowing eyes. Low to the ground. A massive shape slinking forward, shoulders rolling with unnatural grace. It was a dog, but not like any I'd ever seen. Its body was too large, its fur matted with something dark, its teeth bared in a wicked snarl. And its eyes, God, its eyes burned like embers, as if something inside it had never stopped smoldering. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of iron, of rot. A whisper slithered through my mind, not a voice but a memory, one that wasn't my own. A man, dressed in tattered 18th century clothes, limping through a storm, his leg bleeding where something had torn into it. A dog, much like the one before me, but leaner, younger, snapping at his heels as he staggered toward the farmhouse. He pounded on the door, screaming for help. Inside, Ephraim Keller sat at his table, listening to the rain batter the roof, ignoring the desperate cries outside. The man did not survive the night. The next morning, Ephraim stepped outside and found his fields unnaturally green, his crops thick and bountiful, despite the dead season. The land had taken its first offering. I choked back a breath. That traveler's blood had been the seed that kept the harvest alive. The ground trembled beneath my feet, as if something beneath the soil was waking up, stretching, ready to feed again. The dog let out a bone-rattling howl. Then, the whispers turned to voices. You belong to the land now. I clutched my head, staggering back as laughter echoed through the empty fields. The graves. The diary. My own name carved into the stone. The house hadn't just claimed me. I was the next harvest. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the beast lunging toward me, its mouth stretching impossibly wide. Too wide, rows of jagged teeth waiting to rip me apart. And then, nothing. Darkness. Silence. And the feeling of soil pressing down on my chest. I woke up gasping for air. But I wasn't in the farmhouse anymore. I was underground. The dirt pressed against my chest, filling my mouth with a dry, bitter taste. My fingers clawed desperately through the loose soil, pushing, scraping, trying to break free. I wasn't dead. Not yet. The land hadn't fully claimed me. I burst through the surface, inhaling a ragged breath of night air. The world had changed. The farmhouse stood in the distance, but it was no longer abandoned. The windows flickered with an eerie green glow, and the land around it pulsed, literally pulsed, like something alive beneath the earth. The fields were overgrown with something unnatural, twisting vines with thorns as long as my fingers, and the air stank of rot and decay. And then I saw them. Shadows moving between the stalks of diseased crops, shambling figures staggering through the fields. People. Or at least they had been people once. Their bodies were bloated, their skin blackened like rotting fruit. Their mouths hung open, revealing rows of jagged teeth, eyes glowing with the same sickly green light. They moved slowly at first, but then their heads snapped toward me in unison, sensing something fresh. I didn't wait. I ran. I crashed through the brittle corn stalks, the sound of their twisted bodies dragging through the fields growing louder behind me. But the land wasn't letting me go that easily. The dirt beneath my feet softened, hands shooting up from the ground, grasping at my ankles. Skeleton fingers wrapped around my boots, tugging me down. I kicked. I clawed. I screamed. And then the growl. Low. Rumbling. Close. The dog. No dogs. It wasn't just one anymore. Shapes emerged from the fog rolling over the field, mangy, misshapen creatures with gaping maws, glowing eyes, and bodies that looked half-decayed. Their fur was slick with something black and oozing, their jaws snapping with a hunger that wasn't natural. And leading them was the thing that had chased me before. The first beast. Its eyes locked onto mine. It lunged. I barely had time to roll aside as its teeth sank into the ground where I had been. But the creatures weren't after just me. They turned on the dead figures shambling through the fields, tearing into them, spreading the infection further. The zombies didn't die, they just changed. Their already ravaged bodies twisted, growing longer, leaner, more monstrous. Their fingers sharpened into claws, their mouths stretching into inhuman grins. This wasn't just a curse anymore. This was a plague. And it had happened before. A disease of the land. A flash of memory, not mine. A man, early 1600s, wearing a long brown coat and a wide-brimmed hat, stood in a field identical to mine. He was a farmer, a desperate one, harvesting crops that should not have grown in winter. The land had been barren, cursed after the dog had bitten a traveler years before. And yet one day, the crops flourished. The farmer didn't question it. Until his workers started changing. One by one, they fell sick. Their skin grew pale, their veins darkened, and their hunger became insatiable. The infection spread, from the field to the village, to the animals, until an entire town was swallowed by the plague of the land. They were sealed away. The village was erased from maps. The farmhouse was built on top of it, a tombstone for the horror beneath. Until I came along. Until I unearthed it. The virus awakens. The dogs howled, the undead screeched, and the land trembled beneath us. I didn't know if I was running towards something or away from something worse, but I had to move. My legs burned, my lungs screamed, but I didn't stop. The farmhouse was the only place left to go. As I neared the house, I saw movement from the upstairs window. Not a shadow. A person. I wasn't alone. I threw myself through the front door, slamming it behind me, gasping for breath. The air inside was thick with dust, but the glow from the windows cast sickly green patterns across the walls. And then I heard it. Footsteps. I turned, fists clenched, expecting to see another creature. Instead, it was her. The woman I had seen in the mirror. The one who sobbed in the night. She stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes hollow but somehow filled with recognition. "You shouldn't have come back," she whispered. I wanted to ask who she was, but before I could speak, the walls shook violently. A shriek echoed through the house, a sound so unnatural it made my bones ache. The virus wasn't done spreading. Through the cracks in the wooden walls, I saw them coming. More creatures. More things. The land was waking up. The harvest was due. And this time, it wasn't just claiming me. It was claiming the world. The woman stepped closer, her feet silent against the wooden floor. Her hollow eyes flicked toward the window, where the writhing mass of creatures pressed against the glass, their glowing eyes and gnashing teeth desperate to get inside. "They'll come for you," she whispered. "They always do." Before I could respond, the blare of sirens shattered the silence. Police. I turned to the window. Blue and red lights flickered through the thick fog rolling over the land. Several black SUVs skidded to a stop in front of the farmhouse, their doors flying open as uniformed officers and security personnel poured out, weapons raised. "Drop your weapon!" one of them shouted. I raised my hands. I'm unarmed. On the ground!" Before I could explain, something smashed against the door behind me. The walls trembled as the creatures outside grew more frenzied, sensing fresh blood. The lead officer, a broad-shouldered man with a bulletproof vest labeled SWAT, motioned to his team. "Secure the perimeter! Find out what the hell is going on here!" Then the woman vanished. One moment, she was standing beside me, then, just gone, like she had never existed. The officers didn't seem to notice. "What's going on here?" the SWAT officer demanded, his rifle pointed at me. You need to leave," I stammered. "This place isn't—" Something outside screeched. Then, the glass shattered. The creatures poured through the broken windows like a flood. The officers opened fire. Gunshots erupted, deafening in the tight space. The creatures jerked as bullets tore through them, but it didn't stop them. They just kept coming. "Fall back!" one of the officers shouted. They tried. But the house wasn't letting anyone go. The front door slammed shut on its own, trapping us inside. The SWAT officer grabbed my arm. "What the hell is this?" I didn't have time to answer. From the hallway, something big moved. The dog. The original beast. The guardian of the land. Its massive form emerged from the shadows, its fur slick with something dark, eyes burning like embers. The moment it stepped forward, everything stopped. The creatures, zombies, ghouls, whatever they were, froze in place. The police officers, breathing hard, their rifles still raised, hesitated. The beast let out a deep, rumbling growl. And then it bit. Not me. Not the officers. But one of its own. It turned and sank its jagged teeth into one of the undead figures near the broken window. The moment its fangs pierced the rotting flesh, the creature convulsed violently. Its body twisted and jerked, its mouth opening in a silent scream as a thick, black substance poured from the wound. The creature changed. Its limbs elongated, its spine snapping and reforming, its face stretching into something less human and more monstrous. A ripple went through the others, like a chain reaction. The plague was evolving. The forgotten history. The SWAT officer yanked me back. What the hell was that? But I wasn't listening anymore. The diary. I still had it clutched in my shaking hands. The pages moved as if being turned by an unseen force. Then, the final entry burned into my vision. The bite is not the end. It is only the beginning. I saw it again, the past flashing before my eyes. The year 1783. A traveler, desperate and cold, stumbling through a storm. The farmhouse had been different then, newer, the fields still rich with crops. But the land was already cursed. He made it to the barn before the dog found him. It was smaller then, still monstrous, still unnatural, but younger, its hunger not yet fully realized. It lunged, its fangs sinking deep into his leg. He survived the bite. Or so he thought. Days later he fell ill. His skin turned gray. His veins darkened. His hunger became unbearable. The first zombie. Not a virus, not an infection, a curse. Passed down through generations, growing stronger with each harvest. And now? Now the harvest was in full bloom. The last stand. The creatures around us convulsed, their bodies twisting into something worse than before. The police had seen enough. "Light 'em up!" the SWAT officer roared. Flamethrowers ignited, spewing jets of fire across the farmhouse. The walls caught immediately, the old wood burning fast. The creatures shrieked, writhing as the flames consumed them, but the fire wasn't enough. The dog was still standing. The police formed a tight line, unloading everything they had. Bullets, fire, grenades, nothing stopped it. It moved through the onslaught like a ghost, its eyes locking onto me. Because I was the reason this had happened. I was the final piece. The farmhouse burned around us, the creatures howling in the flames, but the land wasn't done. Something beneath the house shifted. The ground split open. The beast lunged. And I fell. Down into the darkness below. I fell for what felt like forever. The farmhouse, the police, the fire, it all vanished above me as I plunged into the black abyss below. The air was damp and thick with the smell of rot, and the walls of the pit were lined with roots that pulsed, like veins carrying something alive through the earth. Then, with a bone-cracking thud, I hit the ground. I groaned, pain searing through my body, but I was alive. Barely. The pit was deep. The ceiling above me flickered red and orange as the burning farmhouse collapsed, the light barely reaching me. But in the dim glow, I saw them. Graves. Hundreds of them. Some were fresh, the dirt still loose. Others were open, empty. The wooden coffins inside splintered, their occupants missing. And in the center of it all, an altar, carved from black stone, slick with something that shimmered like oil. And then, the whispers started. At first soft. Murmuring. Hissing. Then louder. 1,000 voices crying out in agony. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't stop. The air grew thick, pressing against me like unseen hands trying to push me down. The earth trembled. The graves moved. Something was coming. A shuffling sound echoed from the darkness, followed by the wet slap of something dragging across the stone. I turned, my breath caught in my throat. And there it was. A figure stepped forward, towering, its body made of bones and roots, its face hollow, empty, except for its mouth. A mouth filled with teeth. Rows and rows of them, stretching too wide, like a wound carved into its face. It opened its mouth. And I saw everything. The truth of the land. The land had been cursed long before Ephraim Keller, before the farmhouse was even built. It was never meant to be farmed, never meant to be disturbed. The crops that grew here? They weren't natural. They fed on something else. Something buried. Something old. The figure, the harvest lord, was the keeper of the land, the one who decided who stayed and who was consumed. And I had dug too deep. I stumbled back, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but the graves burst open. Hands clawed free from the earth, pulling twisted corpses from the dirt. They weren't like the zombies above. These things were older, meaner, hungrier. They had been waiting. Waiting for me. The harvest lord took a step forward, its roots stretching, slithering toward me like grasping fingers. "You are part of the land now," the voices whispered. I ran. I didn't know where, I just ran. The graves erupted around me, skeletal figures clawing their way free. I tripped, scrambling through the dirt, my heart hammering against my ribs. The tunnel ahead twisted, leading deeper, deeper into the cursed earth. Then I saw it. A door. Ancient, rotting, carved into the stone. I slammed into it, fingers scrabbling for a handle, anything. The creatures were behind me. The harvest lord loomed closer. The whispers grew deafening. I pushed. And the door opened. The last harvest. I wasn't in the tunnels anymore. I was back in the farmhouse. But it wasn't burning. It was new. The wooden floors gleamed. The air smelled of fresh bread and tilled soil. Outside the window, golden fields stretched for miles under a perfect blue sky. For a moment, I thought I had escaped. Then I saw him. Ephraim Keller sat at the kitchen table, his hands folded neatly in front of him. His eyes, black, endless, fixed on mine. "You understand now," he said calmly. I shook my head, my body trembling. No, I don't." His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "The land never lets us leave." I turned. The window was gone. The door was gone. The walls bled. The golden fields outside? They weren't fields. They were bodies, rows of them, buried beneath the earth, their mouths open in silent screams. I fell to my knees. I was never meant to leave. I was part of it now. The farmhouse, the land, the curse, they had claimed me. I opened my mouth to scream. But all that came out was the sound of the wind, whispering through the fields. And somewhere, deep underground, the harvest lord smiled. The end.